Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg Postgraduate School. My name is Koketso Pila, and I will be your moderator today. Please allow me to start off by thanking all our attendees for taking your time to join us today on the session. And most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Prof. David Dudoit, for his effort in preparing and giving this presentation. So before I officially introduce Prof. David Dudoit to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. And so for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak or type your question in the chat box. I will then indicate to the presenter to address your question. And as I've stated, that the session is recorded and the recording link will be uploaded on our Moodle community as well as the presentation slides. And also the feedback survey will be sent out during the session on the chat box. May we please request that you fill the survey out for us to gain some insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve moving forward. Without wasting any more time, please allow me to introduce to you our facilitator, Prof. David Dudoit, by reading out his bio. So, Prof. David Dudoit is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg and an NRF Y2 rated scholar. He is currently teaching third year social science research methodology and SPSS for honors and the advanced social research course for MA students. His research mainly focuses on outsourcing and domestic work. Prof. David is also on the editorial board of the Sociological Review and on the executive board of Clinical Sociology at C46. So I will officially hand over to Prof. David Dudoit. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation to this event. I'm just quickly going to put on my camera to say hello, everyone. And it's an honor to be here. And I hope you, by the end of the session, that you've gained some insights into the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. And if you have any questions afterwards, then we can have a session on the question and answers. I don't think I would take more than 40 minutes, maybe even less. So just bear with me. I am going to share my slides. I'm just going to switch off my camera again. I am going to share my slides. So let me just put on my slides here and then we can start. So just give me a second. And I will also email these slides to the facilitator to send it to you or to upload. I just want to know, can you all see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides, but they're not on presentation mode as yet.
Is it on presentation mode now? Is it fine now?
No, still not on presentation mode.
Now? Because I've put it on presentation mode now.
Maybe let me just wait for a bit, but it's not yet on presentation. I don't know if it's on my side, if my network is delaying, but it's not yet on presentation.
On my side it is, I'm not sure.
Maybe someone else can confirm from the attendees, because I noticed that my network is very slow today.
It's not. Maybe you can unshare and reshare.
Do you see it now in presentation mode or not?
Yes.
Otherwise, I just have to speak like this then. On my side, it's on presentation mode. I don't know why it's not on your side on presentation mode.
Okay. Can you click on from beginning? Can you see, or is it on presentation mode on your side?
Okay. So now on my side, it's in presentation mode.
Okay, it's not on presentation mode, but I think we can continue if everyone can see the slides.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna speak like a sorry about this. I don't know why it's not showing on your side. Maybe if I yeah, I don't know. Anyway, let me speak about. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. This session is called Qualitative, Quantitative and Mixed Methods, Research Methodologies. I'm David Twern. I'm from the Department of Sociology, and there's my email address if you have any queries or if you would like to, I don't know, make an appointment with me or speak about something. Just email me, daviddt@uj.ac.za. So today's presentation is going to look at the three traditions in social research, social science research, and qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. I'm sure many of you are aware of these three traditions. You maybe have a lot of knowledge in the qualitative, not so much in the quantitative, or vice versa, or the mixed methods. But the aim of this presentation is just to highlight certain characteristics of each of these three traditions. Now, in my own research, I have published widely in qualitative research mainly, but I've also done some publications in quantitative research and mixed methods. Now, my PhD study on the outsourcing of domestic work a few years ago, I've used a mixed methods approach there. And if you're doing a PhD dissertation, I think a mixed methods is really a nice approach to use because it provides both sides of the coin, really. It shows the strengths of both the qualitative and quantitative approaches. And the problem with mixed methods approach, however, is that it is quite timely. It takes more time than qualitative and quantitative because you're mixing. You use both qual and quant in mixed methods research. So it does take more time. It's much more planning. Yeah, the administration behind it, it takes a lot of time. So it is something to think about if you're doing a longer project that you can do a mixed methods. It is worth it to do it, as it shows both the strengths of qual and qual. If you do a minor dissertation and master's minor dissertation, I would be careful to choose a mixed methods as it takes longer, as the planning is more and so on. So it depends on the time you have for your study and what the aims are. And yeah, but the aim of this session is just to introduce you to all these three traditions. Now, what I designed is this table, and I'm going to speak briefly on these 8 characteristics of the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods approach. I'm going to touch on the philosophies, the approaches to theory, the methodological choices, the strategies or research designs, the sampling methods, the time frame, data collection, and data analysis. Now, I'm sure many of you have some experience in some of these, but yeah, by the end of the session, I think you will get a good overview of the three traditions and these characteristics. Like I said, I will share the PowerPoint slides with the facilitator afterwards to send to you. But I think as I go on, you can make notes and listen carefully. So yeah, so I'm going to start with the philosophies. Now, the philosophies. Now, all research starts from the philosophy, the underpinnings of that research. Now, just briefly, a research philosophy is the overall beliefs or assumptions that lead to produce an understanding about a certain topic or to answer to specific problems. In other words, what is truth and what is reality and how we know something is a truth. If you choose a certain methodology or tradition, then that is based in a certain philosophy. Now, qualitative research is based in interpretivism, where the meanings of how people interpret their everyday life or their experiences, how they experience something, You want to make sure you know what they attach to those experiences and the perspectives from those participants. That is when you use qualitative research. It's based in the interpretivist philosophy. In other words, you want to interpret the meanings, how they experience or understand the phenomena. Quantitative research, however, is the opposite side. It is based on the positivist philosophy, where they emphasize objective measurement and the testing of hypotheses. Now, some of
I'm
you...
sorry, Prof. Can I disturb you for a bit?
Yes.
So the slides are not moving. Have you started moving the slides?
Yes, I have. It's not moving.
Okay, the slides are not moving. No, it's not. Okay, it's moving now. Yeah.
Okay, so I just so I don't know what's going on here, but I know as long as you can see the slides, then I'm happy. You can see the philosophy slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to this. You haven't seen the second slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, so just go back. I've developed this table of the 3 traditions and the 8 characteristics that I'm going to speak about. You know, the philosophies, the approaches to theory, etc., etc. So I think this table gives you a good overview of the differences between the 3 traditions and how you can make sense of them. So I'm going to speak through each of these 8 characteristics. But you can copy this table from the slides when you receive it from the facilitator. Okay, so the philosophies, like I said, is the overall beliefs or assumptions that lead to produce an understanding about the topic or to provide answers to the specific problems. Like I said, qualitative research is interpretivist philosophy, where you want to understand the meanings or the experiences of the participants from their own worldview. Whereas quantitative research is based on the positivist philosophies, which is based on objective measurements and testing of hypotheses. Quantitative research often use labs to test certain things. For example, if you have a hypothesis to say that there is statistical significant difference between people who smoke cigarettes and those who don't smoke cigarettes regarding their physical health, then obviously you have 2 groups. The one group of participants smoke 30 cigarettes a day, and the other group don't smoke at all. And you do certain tests on them to see whether the smoking of cigarettes impact their health or their lung capacity or something, or whether this is related to heart diseases or cancers. Right. So you have a certain hypothesis and you make certain measurements, you make certain tests to provide answers to that problem. A mixed method research is based on pragmatic assumptions. In other words, they emphasize practical solutions and outcomes over the theoretical purity or adherence to a specific methodology. In other words, what is the best possible way to give answers to the research problem? And that's why I said mixed methods is good if you have a longer term project, because it's based both on the strengths of qualitative and quantitative research. In other words, you can draw on the personal experiences of the participants and also draw on the more general experiences to make certain assumptions and generalize those findings to a broader population. Remember, one of the assumptions of qualitative research is that it's very specific, very context-based, where you're interested in the particular case study, particular group of people and their experiences. Quantitative research is more larger based, where you are interested in hundreds of people's views or perceptions of a certain phenomena, and you can make certain deductions from that and generalize those findings to a broader population. For example, if you're interested in UJ students' perceptions of safety on campus, then you will typically distribute a survey questionnaire with certain questions on it, and you can make certain deductions based on statistics, like 85% of the respondents feel safe on campus, however 15 don't, and these are the reasons. So mixed methods draws both on the qualitative and quantitative approaches. So pragmatically, what is the best way to answer the research problem? Now, often you do mixed methods, not just if you have a longer time period, but also if there is relatively little known about the phenomena. in my case, when I did my PhD study, I was interested in the outsourcing of domestic work, where these companies like Marvelous Maids or Domestic Bliss or Broomsticks, those type of companies, provide household cleaning services. There was nothing done on it when I started my PhD, only some international studies, but nothing in South Africa, just one other study in Ghana. So there was almost nothing known about this phenomenon and why people use it and what, the process behind it is. So that's why I use a mixed method, because I could interview people, but also I can do surveys, and then I can make certain generalizations. So it's a very good methodology to use, but it depends on your research problem, the time framework, the practicality of your research, and so on. So think about your own research and how you want to answer your research problem. Are you going to do it through a positivistic approach, where you're going to measure something, do certain tests, have hypotheses? Are you going to do it through interpretivist philosophy, where you want interested in the meanings and the deep experiences of people, or are you going to do it through pragmatic reasons? Well, a combination of the two approaches. Okay. The second characteristic of these three traditions are called approaches to theory. Now, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research have different approaches to theory. Now, qualitative research is inductive. In other words, it involves moving from a specific observation to broader generalizations and theories. In other words, it starts with data collection, then identify patterns and themes from those interviews and transcripts of interviews, and then you formulate a hypothesis or a theory. So in other words, if you interview people who work from home, for example, this whole phenomena of home working, you interview 20 people working from home to try and explore their experiences and perceptions of working from home, how it impacts their daily lives, the work-life balance, all those. So then you interview them, and you realize that people who work from home have more flexibility. They are generally more happy than people who have 8-to-5 jobs, who have to drive an hour to work, sit in an office, have to deal with face-to-face interactions with colleagues and other people. There's a difference. So then you can develop a theory and say that people who work from home are generally more satisfied with their jobs than those who have office jobs. And then you develop a theory of job satisfaction or happiness or something like that. Quantitative research is the opposite side, it's deductive, where you start reading a lot and you develop a hypothesis. Your literature says that generally people who work from home are more relaxed than people who work from office. So your hypothesis will state something like, there's a statistical significant difference between people who work from home and those who work in the office regarding job satisfaction. Then you do the test. In other words, you do the survey questionnaire. You ask a lot of people, 100 or more people, about whether home working is related to job satisfaction or happiness, or whether they're more relaxed or stress levels or whatever. And then what is the implications of those conclusions? You can say that, yes, this study tested this hypothesis, and the results show that home working or people who work from home are more satisfied with their job than those who don't work from home. Okay, so it's the opposite, it's deductive. Mixed methods use an abductive approach to theory. It involves generating the most plausible explanation for a set of observations. In other words, as you observe, as you do the interviews, you develop a hypothesis, then you go back and you test the hypothesis, then you do more interviews. So it's a back and forth process until you are satisfied with the results, the answers. So in other words, the abductive approach is a back and forth. You don't have a linear approach of moving from observations to theory, or moving from hypothesis to the implications of these observations, the conclusions you can draw from it. It's a back and forth. So you have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you go back to the literature, you develop another hypothesis, then you read a bit on theory, then you do more observations, back and forth between empirical work and the literature, the theoretical work. So it's a longer process again. Okay, so here are some examples, and I would like you to read through these 3 examples and see if you can answer it by saying whether these are inductive, deductive, or abductive reasoning. The first one, a researcher studying workplace behavior might observe that employees in a certain company are more productive when they have flexible work hours. By examining this pattern across multiple observations, the researcher might induce a theory that flexible work hours generally lead to increased productivity. In other words, this is an example of inductive reasoning, because you first do the observations, the interviews or the empirical work, and that leads to the conclusion of a theory. Increased productivity is linked to flexible work hours. The second one, detectives find that a series of burglaries in a neighborhood all occurred on rainy nights. One possible explanation could be that burglars choose rainy nights to minimize the risk of being seen. To confirm this hypothesis, detectives gather more data, such as checking for similar patterns in other areas or comparing the number of burglaries in rainy versus clear nights. This is an example of abductive reasoning, the third one, because you can see there they have a certain hypothesis, they test the hypothesis, but then they go back and see that there are other explanations or other answers to the problem. So they go back and forth until they have a plausible answer to this problem. Okay, the third one, based on a general that regular exercise reduces the risk of cardiovascular diseases. A researcher hypothesizes that individuals who exercise at least 3 times a week will have lower blood pressure levels than those who do not exercise. The researcher then conducts a study comparing the blood pressure levels of regular exercises versus those who don't exercise regularly and test the hypothesis. This is an example of deductive reasoning. You have a hypothesis, you make certain observations based on those hypotheses, and you answer it through your empirical work. Okay, so it's important to know the difference between deductive, inductive, and abductive reasoning. Okay. Any questions so far? Are you all okay? So remember, I can't see the hands as I'm speaking on the slides. So if you have a question, you can just interrupt me and ask a question. Otherwise, leave it to the end of the session, and then we can have a general discussion on this. Okay, so if there are no questions, I can just go on. The third characteristic is methodological choice between qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method research. Now, this is important to know there are mono methods and multi-methods, and that the mixed methods approach use a mixed methods or multi-methods approach between disciplines. So let's go from the beginning. Mono methods, it's a single approach, involves using a single methods for data collection analysis within the tradition. In other words, if you use interpretivist philosophy, you use inductive reasoning to theory, and the approach you're going to use is qualitative, in-depth interviews. You can't use multiple tools there if it's a mono method. Quantitative, if it's a mono method, you're going to use closed-ended survey questionnaires. Closed-ended means you ask a question or you have a statement and you have certain answers available where you just tick off one of the answers. For example, do you strongly agree or strongly disagree with the following statement? UJ is a safe university. I strongly agree or I strongly disagree. You have to tick off one of those, or neutral is in the middle. Okay. Multi-method is multiple method approaches involving using multiple methods either in the same, within the same methodological tradition. Okay. So you have to use, if you use a multiple, yes.
It looks like we have a question. I think it's from Zandile or Zandile. I don't remember who it was. I have enabled your mic, so if you have a question, you can speak. I saw you said that your mic is not enabled. You can go ahead and ask your question before you continue.
Okay. Should I just wait for the question?
Okay, let's hear first if she's able to speak, or can we move on? Otherwise, you can just ask the question at the end,
Okay.
or maybe type it in the chat box and I will indicate it to you.
Okay.
I think we can continue.
Okay. So multi-method is a multi-method approach using multiple methods within the same tradition. In other words, qualitative research will only use qualitative data collection tools, for example, semi-structured interviews, participant observation, focus groups, and so on, general observation. Whereas if you use multiple methods in a quantitative approach, you're going to use closed-ended survey questionnaires and or experiments. Okay. Mixed methods typically use a multi-method approach. In other words, a combination of tools to collect data, both within the qualitative and quantitative traditions. In other words, you can use interviews and closed-ended survey questionnaires or experiments. Okay, so that is why it's so good to use mixed methods, is because you can draw on different multiple data collection tools to collect data. As you know, all of these tools have certain strengths and weaknesses. For example, interviews, it's a good tool to use if you're interested in in-depth, detailed experiences of the participants. However, it is very limited in terms of you can't generalize that to the broader population. It's very specific to that particular person's experience. Yeah, so generalizability, is limited to interviews. Whereas if you do surveys, one of the benefits is that you can generalize to a broader population if your sample is big enough. You can draw up certain statistics. You can make certain statistical deductions. However, the limitation is that the deeper meanings or the experiences attached to that participant's worldview or realities, you can't really say anything about that because your deductions are general. So mixed methods, you can use a combination of tools to conduct your research, and that's very good. Okay. So that's very important, this methodological choice. If you do qualitative, you can choose either a mono method, a single method, or a multiple method within that tradition. If you do a quantitative research approach, you can use either a single method or a multiple method. In mixed methods, you use a combination, multiple methods, both within the qualitative and quantitative traditions. That's why it's so good to use mixed methods in research. Okay. Now, the strategies is the fourth characteristic of research. And yeah, basically the research design. Are you going to do archival research? Are you going to do a case study, ethnography? Are you going to do experiment, action research, surveys? So it's there are different ways to design your research, the strategies you're going to use to how you're going to collect data. In other words, if it's archival research, involves the systematic investigation of existing records or documents to answer your research question. In other words, it uses primary sources such as letters or documents or photographs or any other historical records. In other words, if your research question is historically based, if you want to see, for example, how Black identities were portrayed during the apartheid era in the Drum magazine or in social media, not social media, but like in magazines, then you're going to do archival research. You're going to include a certain date, for example, 1950s until 1994, and you're going to look at how Black identities were portrayed in magazines or newspapers, or, so you're going to do archival research. Usually archival research, certain libraries have archives. I know WITS has a huge archival section. Many of these archives are digital. In other words, you can do online research archivally, and it's very interesting. It's very nice to go through these documents, very old documents. Sometimes you have to wear gloves to go through these, documents, these newspapers, these photos and so on. So it's a very specific type of research. Now, again, usually it depends on your research question, but it's also a very time-consuming process. We have to go very systematically through years and years of documents. And sometimes these documents aren't well, kept, and it's sensitive data and so on and so on. So you have to allow yourself a lot of time to it. You have to travel to certain libraries and so on. A case study is another research design where it's an in-depth examination or exploration of a single case or multiple cases within their real-life context. The case could be an individual, organization, event, or community. In other words, in my example of domestic cleaning companies, I included 3 case studies. In other words, 3 household cleaning companies that provide similar household cleaning services to people. And then I compared the experiences of people using these 3 types of cleaning companies. You can compare university campuses. If you are interested in the safety on campuses, you can compare UJ APK campus with Soweto campus, with the Doornfontein campus, or different universities or whatever. So you can decide on, again, your research question, the aim and goal of your research. Is it a single case study or is it multiple case studies? And it's a very in-depth, detailed exploration of that particular case, a particular organization, event, campus, business, whatever it is. Okay. Ethnography is specifically a qualitative research method which involves an in-depth study of people and cultures. Often, if you do an ethnographic research, you immerse yourself in the daily lives of your subjects, often through participant observation, interviews, focus groups, different data collection tools to explore and understand their practices, behaviors, and social interactions. In other words, often anthropologists will use ethnography to go and study, certain customs or norms of a particular community. They might move to that community, live in that community for a year or 2 years. They become part of that community. They become one of the members of that community to try and understand, for example, the impact of poor sanitation or no electricity, what those type of infrastructural problems have on the community. So they become part of the community, they become one of the community. It's often a long-term investigation, can be a few months, a year, 10 years, 20 years. It depends, again, on the type of research you're doing. It's a very detailed, in-depth exploration of the everyday lives of the participants in a particular community, culture, tribe, whatever. So that is a very detailed study again. You can also do action research. That is more participatory and collaborative research approach between you as a researcher and the participants to solve real life or real world problems. In other words, if I do action research on domestic workers, for example, I would participate actively in union meetings with union members and domestic workers, and to try and understand the challenges and the problems they face, but also actively trying to solve them by together as a group, I as a researcher and they as the workers and the union members, to solve these problems, to create interventions for policies to improve the working conditions and the norms and the values of domestic work in South Africa and so on. So you actively participate and you try to solve the problems together. There's no us and them. We are all together, working together to provide an intervention to improve these challenges, to provide answers to these challenges. An experiment is another strategy you can use. It involves manipulation of one or more variables to observe the effects of other variables. In other words, often scientists use experiments to test whether medication works or not. So, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, they use certain vaccines to test the effectiveness of those vaccines, whether it's, if people took the vaccine, and those who did not take the vaccine, what the effect of those vaccines were on, the COVID-19 pandemic, and whether it caused them any serious harm or whatever. So it's often a comparison between two groups experiment. It can also be qualitative, where you compare two communities with each other, one with good infrastructure, low crime rates, low inequality, and another one with high inequality, high crime rates, poor infrastructure, and to do an experiment to see, the quality of life or satisfaction with life, how it compares between these two communities. Then the last one is a survey. It's typically closed-ended for quantitative. In other words, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement? UJ is a safe campus. I strongly agree, I strongly disagree, or I'm neutral. I neither agree nor disagree. That's a closed-ended question. If you do a survey for an open-ended, with an open-ended question, it's often linked to qualitative. You will ask the question, how satisfied are you with the safety of the UJ campus? And then that person, you don't give answers, that person might provides you with an answer. I feel very safe in campus because I feel safe when I walk around in the evening or early in the morning or whatever. I feel safe because there are lots of visible security guards on campus or whatever, so it's a response to that question. So it can be open-ended. You give the participant enough freedom and flexibility to answer in his or her own words if it's open-ended. All right. Any questions so far on this? So it's very exciting again to see how your study, how your research fits into these different streams and what you can do with these streams and what it means for your, ultimately to answer your research problem. It depends on a lot of things, the philosophy, the approach to theory, the methodological choice, and the strategies or the research design. Now I'm going to go through to the sampling method. Now this is also very important. When you in the humanities, often we use empirical research. In other words, we use humans to collect data from, right? We either interview them or we do surveys or do experiments on them or whatever. So we use humans as our unit of analysis. And that's very important in social sciences to use that. We're not using artificial, symbols or metals or whatever, we use humans. Now the sampling, there are 8 different types of sampling. Now I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but I'm quickly going to go through it. Now, the first group is non-probability sampling. Now, non-probability sampling basically refers to sampling that is, you choose your units, your participants, not based on chance, but there's some form of judgment or bias involved when you select your participants. That's non-probability. In other words, some groups, some people, some units in your sample had a better chance to be selected than other people. There's some bias, it's non-probability. Now, the first type is convenience sampling. It involves selecting participants who are easiest to reach or those who are really available. Okay. For example, as a researcher wants to study student satisfaction on campus facilities, they decide to survey students who are in the campus library on a particular day. The sample is convenient because the researcher is already present and can easily access students, but it also may not be fully represented the diversity of the entire student body. In other words, if I go to the library, I give a paper-based survey to the first 50 students I can get access to and ask them please to fill in that questionnaire, that you use a convenience sampling. If I go to a supermarket, I stand at the entrance of the supermarket to see if the supermarket caters for middle-class people or certain groups of people, then you can conveniently do interviews with those people who enter the supermarket. Okay, so it's convenience sampling. The second one is snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is a non-probability sampling technique where existing study subjects recruit future subjects from their acquaintances. For example, researchers studying support networks for individuals with rare diseases might start by interviewing a few patients. Those patients then refer the researcher to others in their network who also have the disease, creating a snowball effect of recruitment. You use usually snowball sampling for hard-to-reach participants. If your study is very particular, if you try to explore or investigate the experiences of people living with HIV/AIDS, for example, you may know one or two patients or people with that, but through their networks, they can refer you to other people with this disease. Or if you want to do interviews with migrants in Johannesburg who are originally from Malawi, then you might know a few people who are from Malawi and you interview them and they refer you to others in their network who are from Malawi. So it's usually hard to reach people when you do snowball sampling. Okay, another non-probability sampling technique is purposive sampling. It involves selecting participants based on specific characteristics or criteria relevant to the research question. For example, a researcher interested in the experiences of veteran teachers in a specific subject area might use purposive sampling to select only those teachers who have at least 20 years of experience in that subject. This ensures that participants have relevant expertise and insights. So, for example, if you, like this example says, if you want to understand the experiences of teachers who have been working as teachers for 20 years or more, you're only going to include teachers with at least 20 years of experiences. Or think about characteristics like race, class, gender, income status, migrant status, sexuality, okay, disability, all those characteristics you can include or exclude in your sampling, and that creates purposive sampling. In other words, you choose your participants based on certain characteristics. It's usually more than one characteristic, it's not just age, but also race, class, gender, and so on. Quota sampling involves dividing the population into subgroups and then selecting participants from each subgroup to ensure representation according to certain characteristics. So if you study consumer preferences for a new product, a researcher might divide the population into age groups, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, and so on. They then select a predetermined number of participants from each age group to ensure that the sample reflects the age distribution of the general population. In other words, if you want to test a new, I don't know, toothpaste, for example, you're going to see whether the consumers are mostly younger people or middle age or elderly people. You're going to, select a certain proportion of people based in those age groups and to see whether the specific toothpaste, is used by that particular age group or not, or whether they prefer another toothpaste or whatever. So to test certain products or certain services, you want to see whether that caters for a certain group of people, or is there no difference between these age groups or race groups or between the sexes and so on. So they are, again, sampling based on certain judgment. It depends on the question you ask. Probability sampling is the other group, the next group. That involves random, certain randomization. In other words, there's a chance, an equal chance of being selected. There are 4 types of probability sampling. The basic one is random sampling. Random sampling is basically where every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. This method aims to achieve the representative sample and reduce bias. In other words, like the lotto, there are, I think it's now 50 or 52 numbers. You have to select 6, and if that's selected the 6 numbers you selected, then you won the jackpot, right? So there's an equal chance of being selected. If you think of your classroom, there are 100 students in the classroom, and as the lecturer chooses any 5 students randomly, it chooses in the first row, the second student, and the last row, the 4th student, and so on. You randomly select the students, or you ask all the students in the classroom to give him their student cards, in a bag. It's random select 2 student cards, and those students have to present something or do something. Okay. Systematic sampling it involves every 6th or 10th or 20th member on that list. You start at a random number, and then you systematically every 5th or 10th or 20th or 100th name on that list is selected to participate in the study or to participate in something. What this means is that you have to have a list, a class list, or a list of all the students that you who are registered for a particular subject at UJ or something, and you order that list alphabetically or according to the student numbers from 1 to, or according to their surnames or whatever, according to age, and then you select randomly every 5th student. So every 5th student on that list you highlight, and that student needs to do something, because that's systematic sampling. Stratified sampling involves dividing the population into distinct subgroups or strata, and then taking a random sample from each strata. This method ensures representation from each subgroup and can improve the precision of estimates. In other words, a study in health behaviors might satisfy the population by gender and age group. The researcher would randomly sample individuals from each gender and age group to ensure that the final sample reflects the diversity of the population in terms of those characteristics. Another example might be, in class, if you think of your classroom, there are either students who identify as male or female, or the smaller group might not identify as either male or female, okay? Within those gender groups, you select 5 students per gender group. So 5 students who identify as male, 5 students who identify as female, and 5 who don't identify either as male and female. And you ask them certain questions about their experiences of identity or workplace experiences or whatever. Yeah. So you divide, but again, you have to have knowledge of what the whole population looks like. In other words, the whole classroom on a particular day means that there are certain amount of male students, certain amount of female students, certain amount of students who don't identify as either. And then you have to base your sample on those characteristics. Okay. The last one is multi-stage cluster sampling, which involves selecting clusters or groups randomly and then select participants from those clusters. Okay, so you often use multi-stage cluster sampling if geographically they are far from each other or spread out or so on. For example, there are, I think, 24 or 26 universities in South Africa. You might divide them in per province. So in Gauteng, you have Wits, UJ, UP, UNISA, TUT, okay? In the Western Cape, you have UCT, UWC, Stellenbosch, okay? And others, I'm not quite sure. Eh? Then you select, and in KwaZulu-Natal, you have KZN, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, you have other universities or colleges. So then you make a list of all the provinces and all the universities within those provinces. Then you randomly select province or 2 provinces, and you go to those universities selected in those provinces and do your study. So you compare, for example, Gauteng with the Eastern Cape, and in Gauteng there are 4 or 5 universities. In the Eastern Cape there are 2 or 3 universities, and then you do a comparison between those universities. Okay. Or if you do by students' views on how productive they are at university and to get good grades, whether the discipline or the subject determines that, you're going to divide students who do sociology as a major subject, or psychology, or social work, or engineering, or whatever. And then you randomly select 2 or 3 disciplines or subjects, and then within that subject, you're going to interview a select group of students, clusters. Okay, so that is a sampling, but I'm sure you are all aware of the different sampling techniques to use. In qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods, you can use a combination of sampling techniques. So It depends on your study again, depends on whether you have a complete list of the participants or the population in that group, or, so often in qualitative research, if often students use snowball sampling because it depends on the type of research I do. It's often hard to reach populations. If you want to investigate certain experiences of a group of people that are, not easy to reach, then you use a snowball sampling or purposive sampling. Those are the two main ones that I've seen in the studies I've supervised or examined, that students often use a snowball sampling and purposive sampling in qualitative research. In quantitative research, they often use random sampling or systematic sampling. Those are sort of the two main sampling techniques, but depends again whether you have a complete list, population list, how much time you have, how much money you have to travel, and so on. All right. Now, the sixth characteristic is the time frame. Now, you can either do a cross-sectional study or a longitudinal study. It depends on your question, again, your research problem. The majority of cases, I would say 90% of studies, do cross-sectional studies. You examine data from a population or representative subset sample at a single point in time. It provides a snapshot of a particular moment, allowing researchers to identify patterns, correlations, and differences among the groups or the members within the groups in a specific time. For example, a researcher wants to study the prevalence of obesity among students on campus. They collect data on participants' weight, height, and lifestyle factors, such as diet and exercise habits. The data is collected in one go between 15th and 30th of August this year, and the study provides a snapshot of obesity rates and associated factors at that specific time. Think about your own study, how and when you're going to collect data. The majority of cases, you're going to collect data in a specific time frame, over 6 weeks or 2 months or so on. Usually, if it's a master's, it's usually a month or two. If it's a PhD, it can be several months, maybe even a year, but it's not longer than that. It's a cross-sectional study. It's a particular time period. So you can make certain deductions of that particular time. If you're interested in voting behavior, you're going to interview or do surveys of voters who have voted during the last election. So it's a particular time period. So it's a particular day. Or you're going to see before the election started and after the election started, whether they, were impacted by, the different parties and the promises they make, and whether they've voted for that party, and the outcomes afterwards, if they're satisfied with the party or not. So it's a particular time period you're interested in. That's a cross-sectional study. The opposite is a longitudinal study. Tracks the same individuals or groups over an extended period of time, collecting data at multiple time points with the same group of people. Okay. This approach helps researchers understand the changes and developments over time and can establish temporal relationships and causality. Okay. For example, a study that tracks the development of cognitive abilities in children from birth to adulthood, and to examine how early childhood experiences and interventions affect cognitive development over the long term. So, for example, another example is you go to a community, you interview a group of people, a group of households on the infrastructure in the community, the job losses, the inequality. A year later, you go to the same people in the same households, you ask the same questions, and you want to determine whether there are changes in their perceptions or behavior or norms or customs regarding the problem. You can, and then the year after that, you're going to interview them again. So you can, through multiple points in time, you're going to interview, collect data from the same group of people, the same community members, the same teachers, or the same students, or same, anything. That's a long time period. Often, longitudinal studies often takes much longer time than cross-sectional studies. It's obvious, but also usually for long-term projects, PhDs, but also other projects that specifically designed where you want to see whether values or behaviors are changing over time, or what the impact of certain things are on a group of people over time. So that is important to note. But like I said, our students often, or the majority, 90% or even more, use cross-sectional studies. It's only a few of them who use longitudinal studies because of time pressures. It's much more expensive to do it, takes longer time, it's more complicated. Often you don't have access again to those people, then you have to reflect on what you can do to avoid those gaps and so on. So it is quite intensive. Data collection, I finally get to the data collection. Now, once you've done all these steps, all these different characteristics within a tradition, you go to data collection. Now, in qualitative research, we often use interviews. It's the main source of data collection in qualitative research, where you have one-on-one interactions or conversations or interviews between you as the researcher and the participants. It's one in person, or it can be online, just Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp calls, or so on. It can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. Semi-structured is the one we use the most in social sciences, but structured interviews follow a strict script of questions. It's the same order. Those questions are asked in the same order for every participant. You don't probe, you just ask those questions. Whatever the person says, you write down or you record, and you ask the next question. So it's very structured. Unstructured, the opposite, open-ended questions, more like a conversation you have with the person. You focus on the participant's response. You, whatever the participant says, you follow up and go on. Semi-structured is you have a flexible set of questions, 5 or 8 or 10 questions, but you also probe. Whatever the person says, you follow up with sub-questions or more questions until you're satisfied with the answer. Now, interviews you often mostly use in qualitative research, but you can also use structured interviews where you have specific questions with specific answers in quantitative research. Okay, mixed methods, like I said, you're going to use a combination of interviews with surveys, with experiments and so on. Focus groups, often used in qualitative research. It involves guided discussions or conversations within a group of participants. Usually that group shares or have something in common. They are all part of a particular subgroup or experience. They're all diabetic, or they're all, share some characteristics. They are disabled, or they are visually impaired, or something. They share some characteristics, and you all want to explore their overall experience or related to that topic. Okay, so focus groups, usually qualitative. It can be quantitative. It depends on the type of questions you ask and whether you're going to take statistics to say 5 of the 6 people in the group answered yes to this question, whereas only 1 person said no. The next question, 2 people said yes, 4 said no, and so on. So it can be quantitative, but it's mostly used in qualitative research. Observation can be either qualitative or quantitative. It involves systematically watching and recording, observing people's behaviors, events, or interactions. In other words, you can either do participant observation or non-participant observation. Participant observation, you become one of the members. In other words, you become part of that group. For example, if you do research among petrol attendants, you will ask the manager if you can get some training, and you work as a petrol attendant for 2 weeks or months to explore how people treat petrol attendants, or the physical aspects of the job, or the shift working night shifts versus morning shifts, how that impact your well-being and so on. So you become part of that group. You work as a petrol attendant, but you also, once you become part of that group, you interview people, you observe people, you observe the interaction between colleagues on the forecourt of the petrol station, or you can observe the interaction between them and customers or whatever. Non-participant observation, the researcher remains passive. In other words, he passively observes the interaction. So you don't work as a petrol attendant, but you just sit there on the forecourt, on the petrol station, and you observe, you note whether there are conflict involved or whether there are some form of discrimination or whatever. So you just basically observe. If you sit in a shopping mall at a coffee shop, you observe how waiters are interacting with the clients or the people in the coffee shop. The type of emotion they display, whether they're friendly or whether they spill the drink, what effect that has had on the experience, whatever. So you just casually observe. Again, it can be mostly qualitative. It can also be quantitative because it depends on how you note, how you take that data, or how you collect that data. Are you going to tick off the amount of time people swear in the conversation, or are you going to interpret how people use swear words to display frustration or anger? Okay, so it depends on how you collect the data, what you're going to do with that data. Often in quantitative research, we use questionnaires. But again, like I said, it depends on how you're going to structure that questionnaire. It's going to be closed-ended, where you give predetermined answers or options where the person just tick off, or is it going to be open-ended, where you ask the question or you read out the statement, and whatever that person says, you record. So that's a type of structured interview. Again, so it depends on how you collect data, what you want to do with that data. You want to draw up statistics or patterns, or want to interpret the meanings that people attach to those. In this example here on the right side, it's typical closed-ended questions. The existing site is unattractive and distracts from the streetscape. Strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Typical closed-ended question, typically linked to quantitative. Okay. So again, mixed methods, you use a combination. So you'd use interviews, focus groups, where you collect data qualitatively. In other words, you have a semi-structured interview where you have a certain amount of questions, but whatever that person says, you probe, you tease out until you're satisfied with the answer. But you also use questionnaires, closed-ended questionnaires based on that topic, where you have certain closed-ended questions. Strongly agree to strongly disagree, or highly approved to not approved at all, whatever the options are. And then you interpret that data, you analyze that data, either statistically or through qualitative means. Then there's also document reviews. Typically, when you do archival research, you're interested in a historical overview of certain phenomena or certain experiences. You have a specific date in mind, and you collect data, documents based on that date, and you analyze, document review, you analyze existing documents to gather information relevant to the research topic. This can include records, reports, letters, photographs, policy documents, whatever. You want to analyze how those documents portray certain groups of people or certain experiences. And then you make certain deductions based on that. Either you can do quantitatively, you're going to say 80% of the documents reviewed show that migrants are often portrayed as people who are marginalized in society, they're voiceless, they're not protected by labor legislation, whatever, whereas 20% of the articles reviewed in the documents show that migrants have agency, that they have some power and authority, they can implement change. So that is a typical way to record the documents quantitatively through statistics. Qualitatively, you're going to analyze what these articles say about migrants. Some of them say that they are voiceless because A, B, and C. Some of them say that they have agency. These are the types of agency. These are examples of the agency, and so on. So you analyze it qualitatively. Mixed methods, you use a combination. Okay. So it's very interesting, all these different types of data collection techniques. Data analysis, often used in qualitative research, is systematic analysis. You identify, analyze, and report patterns, themes within the data. Now, often when you do an interview, you record that interview digitally on your cell phone or voice recording device. Once the interview is done, it's usually 45 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours. That's sort of generally the length of one interview. You transcribe that interview. In other words, word for word, verbatim. So you listen to the recording. Now, 1 hour of recording can take 6 to 8 hours of transcribing. So it is quite painful. It's quite difficult. It's a time use process. It's one of those things you have to do where you type word for word the conversation. Now, as you know, we speak faster than what we type, so it is quite challenging to do that. But once you have transcripts of all 10 or 20 interviews, usually around 500 pages or so on, then you analyze it thematically. What are the common themes in this, in this interview, this transcript? And you analyze it thematically. You say, the majority of participants experience xenophobia in a particular community. These are the type of xenophobic attacks that they have been victims of. These were the reasons or the consequences or whatever. So these are the themes that emerge from the data. You use coding and themes to highlight common experiences. And I'm going to show you an example. Here's an example of coding and themes. So in this, it's just very, very basic, but the transcript section, I noticed that most homes have fences in front of them. There are many dogs, mostly German shepherds, with signs on fences that say, beware of the dog. Now the code, remember, these codes are flexible. It depends on your interpretation of that particular section. So in my understanding of this section, it's something about security or safety or, safety measures or private security measures or home safety or something. I'll just say my code is security. The second one, he cares about me. He has never told me, but he does. He's always been there for me, even when my parents were not. He's one of the few things that I hold as a constant in my life. So it's nice. I really feel comfortable around him. So the type of themes or codes that emerge from this transcript is something about self-worth, maybe relationship stability, comfort. You can even say love, care, um, you know, expectations of relationships, can you see? So those types of codes are flexible. It depends on how you interpret it. The last example, there's just no place in this country for illegal immigrants. Round them up and send those criminals back to where they come from. So this type of issue or theme that emerged from this, something about immigration, it can be xenophobic, it can be illegal immigrants, something about what that section says about what is the common theme there. And I promise you, as you go through all your transcripts, you develop all these codes. You can have 100 codes, and then once you review it again, you can say, okay, so one section speaks about security, the other section speaks about safety. So it's more or less linked. So the second level of codes might be only security. The third code might be home security. Can you see you go on until you have your final list of codes or themes that emerge. So it's also a lengthy process, but it's very interesting. It's actually one of the nice things about qualitative research is this interpretation of the transcripts. So this is typical how you analyze qualitative interviews. If you do it quantitatively, you might count how many times people say care or criminal or xenophobia or whatever in these conversations, and then you record it. You can say that 52% of the participants mentioned the word security or crime in the interviews. It depends on certain factors, whatever. So it depends on how you analyze it. Content analysis, that's another way to analyze qualitative data, systematically coding and categorizing the content of textual or visual data, photos, to identify patterns, themes, or biases. In other words, if you look at an exhibition, a particular artist's exhibition, and see whether that artist portray a certain group of people, the type of colors he or she uses, whatever. So you count and you analyze. This particular exhibition uses a lot of red. Red symbolizes anger or love or romance. You analyze it in that way. Why does artists use red in all these artworks? What is the process behind it? What is the implication thereof, or the goal of using red in this exhibition? Okay, so it's very interesting. Another example, analyzing social media posts to understand public opinion on educational policies. For example, you analyze Twitter or X and see how people feel about the fees must full movement, or sanitation on campus, or the lack of water or electricity on campus, what impact that has on a certain group of people. So content analysis, how much time, how many times they use or speak about a particular topic, what do they post about it, do they post photos of the poor state of the toilets at UJ, or the safety concerns, or whatever, so there's certain things they show on X or Facebook or Instagram, and what type of photos do they show and present. Then quantitatively, we can analyze the data through descriptive statistics or inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics are summarizing data using measures such as the mean, in other words, the average, the median, the midpoint, the 50%, the midpoint of that range, or the mode, what type of answer was given the most in that data. So you say 80% of respondents said this, 15 said that, 5% didn't answer this question, or something like that. Okay. Inferential statistics, you use specific tests, statistical tests, to make certain predictions or conclusions. You typically use t-test or chi-square or ANOVA or regression or correlations, where you make, it depends on your data, whether it's a nominal, ordinal, or scale variable, and what you can do with those types of data. So this is a mouthful, but in mixed methods, like I said, you do use a combination of these things. Now, the process, just to finally let you know that there are 3 ways to combine quantitative and qualitative research approach in mixed methods. If you use a mixed method, exploratory mixed methods, explanatory mixed methods, or concurrent mixed methods. There are 3 ways to how you present, the research process behind mixed methods. The first one, exploratory mixed methods research, starts with qualitative data collection analysis to explore a phenomena and generate hypotheses or questions. The findings from the qualitative phase inform the subsequent quantitative phase, which tests the hypothesis and explores the patterns identified. In other words, you first do the qualitative section, you do your interviews, your focus groups, you interpret, you use a thematic analysis, you transcribe the interviews, you do the coding and the themes, and you write up your findings. From that findings, you develop a questionnaire, and you distribute that questionnaire to a particular group of people to answer, and then you gain statistics from that questionnaire. The opposite, explanatory mixed methods research, starts with quantitative data collection analysis. The findings from the quantitative phase are then further explored using qualitative methods to explain or provide deeper insights into the quantitative research. In other words, you first do the survey questionnaire, you distribute it among a group of people, you analyze it statistically, you get certain results, graphs, the t-test shows this, the chi-square shows that, and then you make certain deductions. Then you follow up those results qualitatively by interviewing a group of people to understand the deeper meaning, the deeper experiences they have with this, how they experience that particular phenomenon. Then there's a concurrent mixed methods, which involves collecting and analyze qualitative and quantitative data simultaneously. At the same time, when you do the interviews, you also give survey questionnaires to that group of people to answer certain closed-ended questions, and you analyze the interviews qualitatively and you analyze the survey questionnaires quantitatively, and you present your data concurrently. On this particular theme, this is what the person said, and these are the statistics. Move on to the next theme, and so on and so on. Now, in my PhD, I used explanatory mixed method. I first started with the quantitative data collection, where I distributed the survey questionnaires. I had certain questions on it, and I analyzed it, and I presented those results. Then I selected a group of people to do interviews with, did the interviews to get a deeper understanding of those results, why they say that they are satisfied with A, B, and C, or dissatisfied with that. So that is it's very interesting to use mixed methods. So after you know mixed methods, you're going to use quant and qual, difference, the combination of the two, but how you're going to present, how you're going to collect the data depends on this process, either exploratory, explanatory, or concurrently. Whether that's a cross-sectional study or longitudinal study, and so on. It depends on your research problem. Thank you so much. I'm finally done. I hope I've given you some things to think about, and yeah. And then now I open up for questions. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you, Prof. David, for that very detailed and insightful presentation. I think we all learned so much from this presentation, and of course, we're going to open up the floor for questions. Any questions for Prof. David?
I think, yeah, if there are no questions, it's fine. I mean, I think it is quite a mouthful, and I think, like I said, I will share these slides with the facilitator to send it to you. And I think the main thing, the main lesson I want you to take away from this session is that research is complex. It's not just a straightforward linear process. It's a complicated process. It's often you plan your research from, you know, what philosophy you use, what type of methods, what type of tools. But when you go to the setting, when you actually collect your data, you will see that it's much more challenging than what you anticipated, and that's okay. That's the fun part. It's often messy, you know. It's not as clear cut and linear as you thought, and you know, that's why we do research, is to learn from each other, to learn from the experiences, and to reflect on those experiences, so people can draw on the strengths and weaknesses of that research process. But like I said, it's yeah, it depends on your study, it depends on the goals and the aims of your study, the time you have available for the study, the money, and so on. But it's to do research is so fun. You know, I really enjoy doing research, to get messy, to you know, to interview people, to do surveys, to do focus groups, to do experiments, to do participant observation. It's really fun. So think about your studies and enjoy it. I see there's one hand from Kuketsa.
Hi, Prof.
No.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for such a great presentation. I just wanted to find out, so normally when you speak about methodology, you would hear research methods and research design. So in terms of what you presented, what goes into your research design?
Yeah, so often when you read methodology textbooks or methodology articles, you'll see that scholars use different terminology for different things or the same things. You know, often people say research design and methodology is the same. Often they say data collection tools and techniques are the same, or you know, so it is not as clear cut. It depends on what type of methods book you use or method scholars' work you are inspired by. So what I would say, research design is whether it is, to go back to those slides, it's either, sorry, just give me a second. In certain textbooks, they talk about research design as the case study or the longitudinal study or the cross-sectional study or, the experiment. There's going to be a research design. In other studies or books, they call it strategies. Like I use strategies here. It's either archival research, that's a research design, a case study, ethnography, action research, experiment or survey. That can also be a research design. So like I said, it depends on what textbook you're using and what thought you are inspired by. But I think these are the general general research designs. If you use archival research, you base on specific philosophy, specific process of collecting data, analyzing data. If you use a case study or multiple case studies, that's a research design. You're going to either use a single case study or multiple case studies. Ethnography is much more deeper in-depth detail exploration of the phenomena, of the issue, and either you're going to live in the community or do participant observation or so on. Action research, that's a research design, is the aim to provide, not just to highlight the problems, but to provide interventions to solve those problems. So that's a typical specific research design, action research. Or is the experiment where you manipulate to one group and you compare those experiences with another group who did not get that intervention or receive counseling or whatever that is. So I would say that is the research design.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thanks. Any other questions?
One last more question, Prof. So I can't recall, but there's a point where in your initial slides where you mentioned interpretative research. So where you mentioned something to do with how a phenomena and experience, I'm not sure. So I wanted to find out, how do you then separate a phenomena and experience when you're conducting an international relations research?
If I understand you correctly, you're referring to the philosophy of interpretivist.
Yes.
So interpretivist philosophy is based in the qualitative methodology. In other words, you're interested in the particular meanings or experiences or views of a particular group of people or participants. Whereas the positivist view, positivist philosophy is where it's very much you measure certain statistics or you make certain assumptions based on measurements, based objective measurements. In other words, you test something and you make certain deductions on that test, whether smoking is linked to cancer or whether obesity is linked to, I don't know, high mortality or whatever. So there's certain deductions you make. So if you use the interpretivist philosophy, you're interested in the personal experiences, deeper meanings people attach to that reality, to that knowledge. So it depends again on how you formulate your research. Now, if you analyze documents or you analyze policies, you might use an interpretivist approach where you analyze it in terms of what are the type of issues they highlight there or they mention there, how do they solve those issues and so on. That's what I would say.
Okay, so normally I struggle when it comes to your foreign policy studies because we hardly have experiences. It's a phenomena, so I can say I'm interpreting a phenomena and leave out the experience.
Yeah, it depends on, it depends again what you want to do with that. I can't give specific answers to you because it depends on a whole process behind this. It's not, like I said, it's not as simplistic. Depends on, you know, are you going to draw on documents? You're going to do a document analysis. Are you going to do archival research? Are you going to do policy? You know, what type of study are you using? Is it a qualitative? Is it quantitative? Are you going to interpret it um, through dialogue, through interview, and you make certain deductions based on that transcript? Or are you going to counter now the amount of times people use certain words in that policy or document? So again, it depends on what you want to do with it. So I think it's difficult for me to answer if I don't see the bigger picture of this. So think about, I would suggest that you go through these slides and start from the beginning. Are you pragmatically trying to answer this question based on certain assumptions? Are you interested in an interpretivist approach or positivistic approach? And then follow the stream from there on. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? I hope you all find this insightful. And yeah, I think the aim of this session is to show you that it's not as straightforward, not as easy as you think it is. You know, it's often a struggle. It's often you're going back and forth between different views on something or different motivations, and then finally you make your decision. In research, often you just have to motivate why you are using certain things. If you chose a qualitative approach, then motivate why you use a qualitative approach based on an interpretivist philosophy, based on the cross-sectional thing that you're going to use, based on a case study. So just follow those steps. If you use a quantitative, you follow the steps. If you use a mixed methods, you follow the steps. So start from the beginning and then work your way through it step by step. But it's actually very exciting to do research. It's very exciting, this methodology behind. Otherwise, why are we doing research? It can be just a conversation between people, but this is scientific research. It's based on scientific principles, and that is why we have these types of methodologies, these types of back and forth, struggling, digging through the messiness of doing research. Okay, any other questions or things you want to share? Well, if there are no questions, then I think we can conclude this.
Yes, if there are no more questions, then we can close the session. Please allow me to take this opportunity to thank you, Prof. David, for your insightful presentation. We really appreciate the effort that you have put in preparing this presentation and also presenting to us. We really thank you. And for sure, we all benefited from this. There's a lot to think about in our studies, all of us. So you gave us a lot of options that we can choose from and we have to read through. So thank you so much for that. And I do believe that everyone has benefited from this session. And I would also like to thank the attendees for taking your time to attend the session. I hope it was beneficial to you and that you've learned a lot. And during the absence of questions or comments or anything, then we can close the session.
Thank you so much for this opportunity again, and it's always a pleasure to speak, you know, about these things to students and to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. May I please also remind all our attendees to complete the survey form? I'm just going to put it for the last time on the chat, and so everyone can complete the survey.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
And I will just email you the slides, and then you can share it with the participants.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for this. And yeah, it was a pleasure to talk about this. Thank you so much. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, everyone on the comments is thanking you, Prof, for an insightful presentation, and someone is saying, thank you, Prof, I will know better as I go through the process. And another one is saying, thank you, the session was very beneficial.
Okay. Oh, great. That's good to hear. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.